Relics of Antiquity by Alfred Percy Sinnett. This piece is from Collected Fruits of Occult Teaching, published in 1919. From Central America, south of Mexico, as the country narrows towards the Isthmus of Panama, the peninsula of Yucatan stretches out eastward. It is not a region that tempts civilized immigrants. The climate is not specially unhealthy, but too hot to be pleasant. Its 500,000 or so of primitive inhabitants have no mineral wealth. Nature endows them with mahogany trees and tolerates tobacco, cotton, and the sugarcane, but the only product which Yucatan sells to the outer world is henequen, a kind of hemp used in the manufacture of coarse sackcloth and hammocks. Yet from one point of view, that of the archaeologist, Yucatan is one of the most interesting regions in the world. It links us with a past that lies far behind the few thousand years that engage the attention of the Egyptologist, and puts us in touch with a period of the Earth's history which used to be regarded as entirely mythical, but has emerged from that comfortless moral atmosphere and is now accorded a grudging recognition by orthodox geology. The fundamental fact that the Atlantic basin must once have been, for the most part, continental land, would no longer offend any modern geologist. The idea used to be ridiculed, but is now treated as a matter of course. Plato, however, is so far only partially vindicated. Geology tolerates the theory that there must once have been an Atlantean land, but declines to have anything to do with the theory that it was inhabited. This is the stage in the development of prehistoric knowledge at which Yucatan comes in. And I am tempted to deal with the subject because one number of the Scientific American has an article about the antiquities of Yucatan that may help to get attention focused on their enormous significance. Yucatan, says the writer, can well be called the American Egypt. The ruins of 172 cities, big and little, have been discovered, and not a quarter of the territory has been explored. Tropical vegetation makes the work difficult. You might pass within 100 feet of a wonderful old temple or pyramid 100 times, and not discover it, so effectively does the jungle screen these crumbling monuments of the distant past. The article goes on to tell us that some of these ruins must once have been large cities, with not less than 500,000 inhabitants in each one. The writer, who seems to have had personal experience, has found one pyramid the most interesting among all these relics of the past. The steps on one side are fairly well preserved, and at the top is a platform, which was the sacrificial altar. There the priests cut out the hearts of living victims. In a great quadrangle at the foot of the pyramid the inhabitants of the city used to gather to watch these festal doings. Around were the palaces of nuns, for whose special delectation these sacrifices were made. The nuns were the aristocrats of ancient. The writer does not tell us from what authorities he derives his information, but anyone who wants to study the subject further will find all he needs in the books of Dr. Laplogiot, an American archaeologist, though with a French name, who devoted his life to the study of Mexican, and especially Yucatan, antiquities, and did much more than merely describe remains. These, like the antiquities of Egypt, are covered to a large extent with inscriptions in hieroglyphic character. The hieroglyphics seem the same as those used in Egypt, but the Egyptologists could make nothing of them. Egyptian hieroglyphics became intelligible when the Rosetta Stone showed what language they spelled. But they certainly did not spell Coptic in Yucatan. The discovery of the language they did spell is the splendid gift Laplogiot bestowed on the archaeological world, and because the results offended the prejudices of the period, still clinging to the idea that Atlantis was a fable, they were never properly appreciated. But the scientific mind at the present day is more accessible to new views, which sometimes involve the restoration of very old views, and the stone inscriptions of Yucatan are already establishing some broad conclusions respecting the people of the old Atlantic continent, compared to whom the earliest Egyptian and Chaldea civilizations were recent stages of human history. In several places Le Plogio came upon inscriptions plainly describing the final catastrophe that submerged the last great surviving fragment of the old Atlantean continent. The date of the catastrophe is even given with precision. It took place 80–60 years before the period at which the event was recorded. Plausible guesses as to the date of the inscriptions add about 3,500 years to the 8,000 odd. So it was about 9,000 odd BC when the stupendous cataclysm took place. And that only affected the last then remaining fragment of the original continent. Yucatan again helps us to realize in some measure what it must have been in its entirety. I was once intimate with a friend, who has since passed away, who was engaged in important mining operations in Mexico. He told me that in the course of explorations in that country and Yucatan, bits of an old road had been discovered in the midst of what seemed primeval jungle. These made a dotted line on the map which extended down through Yucatan, ending abruptly at the sea coast. But again, farther on, bits were discovered on islands lying out at sea. Evidently the old road connected the cities of Mexico and Yucatan with other important centers in regions now covered by the Atlantic Ocean. Inscriptions deciphered by Le Plogio relate to events happening in that region. One of his books deals with the history of a certain Queen Mu of the faraway past, who was driven from her dominions by usurping brothers, and migrated by a long overland journey to Egypt, where among other doings she introduced the Sphinx as an emblem that had previously been what we should call the crest of her family. When the world is at leisure again to concern itself with matters of mere intellectual interest, we may profit by renewed researches in Yucatan to the extent of framing a much more complete history of the Atlantean period, but we shall have to get into the habit of thinking in millions, instead of thousands, of years before we can map out in our minds the stupendous periods through which human evolution has passed. Americans do things thoroughly sometimes, and if they begin to realize that, while the youngest of the great nations in one way, they are also geographically the oldest, they may find it worthwhile to devote national efforts to the further development of the work which one of their own countrymen, Le Plogio, has begun so well. They are apparently waking up to the interests of archaeology if their leading scientific paper, The Scientific American, can be regarded as showing the direction of the wind. Besides its Yucatan article, recent numbers deal at length with the antiquities of Ceylon, though these relate to the yesterdays of the world compared with the remains of cities and pyramids hidden in the jungles of Yucatan.